Hi guys, how's it going? Welcome to my Quantum Leap Effect tutorial. I've always been a big fan of the show and I'd always wanted to have a go at creating the leap effect for myself. I'm a total novice with video editing, but I wanted to come up with something that looked reasonably decent and at least resembled the TV show. In fact, I didn't even know how to use After Effects before I started this, and I had to teach myself how to use it as I went along. It took me a while, but I finally managed it in the end. It's amazing what you can do if you're determined enough. You see, I'd looked at a few other videos on YouTube of other people's attempt at recreating the effect, but it always bugged me that they never looked quite right, and I was frustrated by the fact that nobody seemed willing to do a step-by-step tutorial, even though a lot of people would ask for one in their comments. So I decided I would make the kind of tutorial I wished was out there when I first tried to create my version of the effect. But just before we dive into the actual tutorial, I do want to say a couple of things. First, this isn't a tutorial for how to use After Effects. Like I said, I figured it out as I went along, so I'm only showing you how I did it. There may well be better or easier ways to do the steps I'm going to show you, but for anybody wanting to create their own effects, this is at least a starting point, and even someone who's never used the software before should be able to follow the steps in the video and create a reasonable version of the effect. If you do figure out easier and better ways that still look good, then please let me know in the comments and I'll update the tutorial. Also, I'm going to assume that, like me, you either have little or no experience creating video effects and using After Effects itself, because I'm guessing that anyone who's experienced enough with it probably wouldn't need this kind of a tutorial. With that in mind, I'll be going through it all step by step.
Bad enough I have to give Dick and Jane explanations to the president, I've got to give you one too.
And I'm not going to use any shortcuts by slipping in elements I'd already created. We're going to start from scratch in this tutorial, just using the raw footage that I originally recorded as a starting point. But feel free to skip past any sections you feel you're already familiar with or that you already know how to do. Lastly, I have Asperger's, which is an autistic spectrum disorder. And because of that, vocal communication and speech in general is not the easiest thing for me. But I was so determined to make this tutorial, and I know how much everybody hates those robotic voices that some people use, so I've done my best with it, and I hope I've done a good enough job that you can still follow the steps and they all make sense. Before we can create our own version of the effect, we need to understand how the original was put together in the show. It was basically 5 different elements that were combined together to create the overall leap effect. So if we look at this clip from the show, the leap out, the first part of it is the blue glow that comes in, and then very quickly, almost as soon as the glow comes in, the lightning effect comes in. And then you get this burst of light that comes out, and then you get this aura effect, these little streaks and lines and circles. Sometimes they would put that effect behind Sam, and sometimes they would lay it on in front. I did a bit of research, and apparently the studio had this effect animated by hand onto a piece of film, and then they would layer it onto the scene week by week. But as that expands, you've then got this white glow that usually comes in from the edges and gradually whites out Sam's body. The eyes are the last to go, and apparently that was animated in as well. And then the leap in section of the clip is the same process, it just goes backwards. So you've got the white fade that fades out to the scene. Then you've got you've got this aura effect, the white glow, the eyes come out first, and then the rest of it comes in after. And that shrinks down. Then you've got the lightning, and then the blue glow is the last thing. It's the same effect, it's just it runs in one direction for the leap out, it runs in the opposite direction for the leap in. It's that simple. Sometimes they would freeze frame during the leap. This is a really obvious example, and sometimes they didn't, like this clip here for example. That basically means that you can do it either way. Because of the way that we're going to do it, it's easier for us to do it with a freeze frame. Before you do anything else, I would strongly recommend that you create a folder just for this Quantum Leap project, and then subfolders for in, out, complete and sound effects. And the reason for this is because what we're going to do is we're going to build the effect in 2 separate parts. The leap out and then the leap in, and then we will join the 2 together at the end. Because of the way that we're going to do it, if you've got separate folders for the leap in and leap out while you're building the clip, it's going to be a lot easier to keep track of everything. Sound effects, self-explanatory really, because we will need to download the leap effect sound and any other sound effects that you want to put in. It's a good idea just to keep everything together, and then a separate folder for your completed clip. And the reason for that is purely and simply it keeps it organised. But once you've done your completed clip, if for any reason you want to change it, it's easy to find, and then you can create multiple versions of your completed clip without cluttering up your workspace. So personally, I would recommend you do that. Okay, so obviously before you can build a clip, you're going to have the two clips that you need for the leap out and the leap in, the raw footage essentially, that you will have already recorded. Depending how you've recorded the clip, you might have sections of it that you don't actually need as part of the clip that you need to trim down. So the first thing that we need to do is trim away any parts of the raw footage that we don't need. Now obviously you're going to have leap out and you're going to have leap in, two separate clips. As an example, in my particular case, when I recorded the clips, I was on my own, so I had to start the camera and then get into position. Originally, I decided that the leap out would happen as I stood up, so I did hold that pose for a few seconds and then went and stopped the camera. But when I went and looked at it again, it didn't seem right, it didn't feel natural. So I decided that I was going to have the leap start while I was still sat down. So everything before I sit down and everything after I start to get up, I don't need. And the simplest way to get rid of it is find the point where you want your clip to actually start, which for me is about there. And then if you come down to the end of your clip, so that these two little arrows are highlighted, hold down your mouse button and drag it till it catches up to the playhead. And that essentially trims away the bit that you don't need. So now your clip starts where you want it to start. Likewise, when you get to the end part of your clip, anything that you don't need, find the part where you want your clip to finish. Bearing in mind that we will freeze frame at this point, so anything after the point where you're wanting to freeze the frame on the leap out, you don't need. So the same again, go to the end of the clip, hold down the mouse button and just drag it till it catches up to the timeline. So now you've got just the piece of footage that you want to use, and then just bring it to the beginning of your work area. Once you've edited your raw footage and you've taken out the parts that you don't need, the next thing to do is to create the freeze frame that the leap effect will be built onto. So bring your footage into your timeline, then you come to the very end of your footage, and then if you press Ctrl and D and you duplicate the layer, then come down to the layer that you've just duplicated and right click on there, go up to time and freeze frame. Then stretch that freeze frame out so it gives you enough time to build the rest of the effect onto. And if you go back to the start of your footage, what you should find is that it will play and then it will freeze frame at the exact point where you want the leap to start. And then you're leaving yourself enough time to build the effect onto the freeze frame. How do we know how much time to leave? Well, the answer to that is because the sound clip that we're going to use is 8 seconds long, then the leap out needs to take 4 seconds and the leap in needs to take 4 seconds. And that's how we use that as a basis to time out our leap sequences. So if you go to the point on your footage where your still frame starts and then go 4 seconds from there, then trim down your freeze frame to match, then you know that that's your 4 seconds of your leap sequence, and you do the same on your leap in. That way, when you're building the rest of the effect, you can see how far along you need to stretch it for it to fit into the 4 seconds. So once you've got your trimmed down raw footage and you've got your freeze frame in place, what we need to do now is pre-render that clip. And all I mean by that is come to File, come to Export, and then Add to Render Queue, then just give it a suitable name and then make sure that you save it in the correct folder. I will call this something simple like edited footage. And then click Render. And what that does basically is it turns these two separate layers into one single clip, and it means it's fewer layers to work with. As we start building up the effect, we'll have more layers in the composition, so it becomes less layers to work with, and it makes it very slightly easier to add in a couple of the other effects as we go along. So that's the reason why we pre-render it. The next thing that we're going to do is to create the blue glow that will be the start of the leap out. There are a couple of ways to do this. There's the proper way to do it, and there's a cheat way to do it if you are not very proficient with After Effects, if you're new to After Effects like I am and you're just sort of figuring it out. I'll sort of touch on both methods, and obviously it's down to yourself to decide which you think is the best way to go. So now that we've rendered these two layers into one clip, we don't need this first piece up to the freeze frame. So you can go ahead and delete that, just basically highlight it and then just press delete on your keyboard. Just in case you don't already know, when you do delete this off of here, all you're doing is deleting it off the timeline. You're not deleting the actual clip, which is still here. And the reason why it's only there once, even though we've got it here twice, is because this is still the original raw footage clip that we had before we edited anything. So by deleting it off here, you aren't actually losing the clip as such, and you can always bring it back in again if you need to. So once you've deleted that and you've just got now your freeze frame section of your footage, what we need to do is bring that across to the beginning of your clip, and we might as well rename it to blue glow. As we get more and more layers, as we add in more and more elements of the effect, if everything is named appropriately, then it's very easy to keep track of what's where and what's doing what and what we need to tweak and so on and so forth. So again, just give it a name. The most obvious name is call it blue glow. The actual leap out effect, like I said before, is going to be 4 seconds long, but because of the way that we need this blue glow to fade in at the right moment, we actually want this clip to be slightly longer. The way to stretch it out is basically the reverse way of how we trimmed it down in the first place. If you go to the end and you highlight it, so the two little arrows, hold down your mouse button and drag it, because it's a freeze frame, it will just stretch it as far as you need it to stretch. So I'd make it about 6 seconds. It doesn't matter exactly, because we do have the ability to slide this up and down the timeline as and when we need it. So it doesn't have to be exact, but it does need to be slightly longer than the 4 seconds. The first method that we're going to look at is probably what anyone who uses After Effects professionally would consider to be the correct or proper way to do it, which is to use this roto brush tool. I'm not going to go into detail about what roto brush is and how it works, because there are plenty of tutorial videos on YouTube that will explain it far better than I can. So if you are new to After Effects and you're not really familiar with roto brush, it's worth going and checking those out. But if you do decide you're going to use this method, the first thing that you'll need to do is to duplicate this layer, which is just Control and D. Then go to the layer that you've just duplicated, and if you click this where it says little dot, it will basically, whichever one you click, that's the layer that it's highlighting. So you know then exactly what layer you're actually working on. Select this roto brush tool and then double click in your composition, and then you can see these green crosshairs. And if you hold down your mouse button and sort of draw in your actor, you can see roto brush starts to separate what you've drawn out, which in this case is your actor. It starts to separate it out from the background. Now the beauty of this is, rather than like you would use the pen tool in Photoshop, rather than having a load of plot points all the way around, roto brush, when you select an area, roto brush tries to figure out what it is you're trying to mask out from your scene. Now it's not perfect, as you can see here, it does get it wrong sometimes, but if it brings in part of your background that you don't want, if you hold down the Alt button, you can see the crosshairs go red, and then while you're still holding the button down, you can just sort of highlight the bits you don't want, and eventually with a bit of care and effort it will eventually figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish. Now, I struggled with this for a couple of reasons, and I think basically part of it is because my clip is not 4K, so it's not that clear, and because there's a lot of black in the frame, which I didn't think about when I recorded it, and roto brush obviously is struggling to figure out exactly what it should be separating. The other thing is I've also got this table leg which is in between me and the camera, and trying to roto that out separate from everything else, for me personally, it was a nightmare. But if you do decide you're going to do it this way, then once you've got your actor highlighted and you're happy with it, if you come down to this grey bar and stretch it out to the length of your clip, and all that does is make sure that the roto is there for the full length of your clip. If you didn't stretch this grey bar out, you'll get halfway along your clip and the roto will disappear. The main difference between roto brush and the pen tool is that if there was movement in this frame, the roto brush will track that movement frame by frame, whereas the pen tool can't do that. So if you're competent with it and you know what you're doing and everything, then you can achieve a sort of travelling matte very quickly. Once you've got your actor highlighted with the roto brush tool, if you come down to here and toggle, that's then mask this out. Now you can sort of feather the edge just to smooth it a little bit around the edges, but once you've done that and you've got it as however you like it, if you come to Effect and come down to Stylize, you find this glow tool, and as you see, as soon as you click that, it's already trying to glow the object. But if you come to this glow based on and you change it to alpha channel, and then come here and make sure this is set to A and B colours, and then these are your A and B colours, which you can then change to whatever shade of blue you want. And then by adjusting the radius and the threshold and the intensity, you can get a glow that looks something like. And again, it's just really a question of tweaking around with these settings until you get something that you like. I mean, this isn't exactly how it should be. I'm just rushing through this for the sake of the tutorial to give you an idea. But between the tutorials that you can find and what I've shown you here, if you do decide to use this method, then you should be able to create a blue glow that resembles something that you saw in the show. So once you've got it that you're happy with the glow, then if you unsolo this layer, it disappears. And that's because the glow we've just put on is underneath this low. But if you come here to this mode and you change it to screen, then the layer underneath will merge with the layer on top, and this is how you get your blue glow to show up. That's very quickly. If you're going to do it with the roto brush tool, then that's roughly how you would do it. And as I said, if you go and check out a few tutorials that show you a bit better than I can, then that's probably the way to go. But I really struggle with this roto brush and I just could not get it right, and in the end I lost my patience with it, so I figured out a cheat way to do it, which is what I'm going to show you now. So what I did, instead of using the roto brush tool, I came to the paintbrush tool, and then when you select the paintbrush tool, it brings up the brushes and the paint palette. If you click on foreground colour and set it to something that matches whatever you feel is the right colour for you, as close as you get to the shade of blue that you saw in the show, and then set the opacity to around about 50%, and then come to the brushes, and what you need to do then is you need to set a brush size that is enough that you can trace around the outline of your actor without going too far over the edges. The more of your frame that your actor occupies, then obviously the bigger brush you can use, and obviously the reverse of that, the less of your frame your actor takes up, the smaller brush you'll need. But you just need to make sure that this hardness is at 0, and then that gives us a soft edge. And then all you need to do is hold down the mouse button and then just go around the outline of your actor. You do need to keep the button down all the way around. Essentially, you're airbrushing this colour in, and if you take your finger off the button and then back on again, you'll add multiple layers of colour and then it'll be uneven. I actually prefer this method to the roto brush for a few reasons. One of those reasons being that I think that if you're careful with this, you can actually get something that looks more like what you saw in the show than you can achieve with using the glow tool and the roto brush. It is a little bit more time consuming, but I think the overall effect is better, so I prefer to do it this way. So again, once you've gone all the way around, and you can overlap if you want, overlap the edges a little bit, because in the show the blue glow did overlap a little bit anyway. But if you do, just be consistent and overlap the same amount all the way around. Obviously I'm not doing a really good job of this because I'm rushing it for the sake of the tutorial, but once you've traced the outline, again still keeping your finger down on the mouse button, it's just like craning a picture, just fill it in with colour. One of the other reasons that I prefer this way is, like I said before, this table leg is in between me and the camera. If you do it this way, once you've filled in the main part, it's quite easy to just jump across and fill in any other parts and easily cut out something that you don't want to be blue. That helps to sell the illusion that the glow is actually coming from your actor. Also, you don't need to duplicate the layer when you do it this way, because the colour is going directly onto this layer that you're going to use. One of the other things I think is an advantage of this is that once you've done the layer of one colour, if you wanted to spend the time, you could change the shade slightly and bring the opacity down a little bit more, go over it with the lighter colour, so then the lighter and the darker colours mix, and eventually you could, if you wanted to spend the time, you could end up getting something that is exactly the colour you would have seen in the show. Again, I'm just doing this quickly just to illustrate the point, but by building up multiple layers of colours, you could start with a sort of a bluish purple, and then a slightly darker purple, and then, you know, a layer of a lighter blue. And by building that up, you could end up with a really accurate version of the colour that we saw in the show. And this is why the reasons why I prefer to do this. Now, again, like I say, I'm just doing this very roughly just to give you the point, but if you do this yourself, then obviously the more time you spend on it, the better the effect is going to, the end result is going to be. Whichever method you use to create your blue glow, once you've got that, then if you import the edited footage that we did earlier, which was the trimmed down raw footage with the still frame added onto it, and then what you need to do after that is, if you come to the beginning of your clip and basically find the point where your freeze frame starts, and then if you come here and you come to transform, and come down to opacity and set the little stopwatch, and that sets the opacity at 100%, and then just take it forward a few frames, bring the opacity down to, slide the opacity down to 0, and what that will do, it will fade out the layer above your blue glow so that your blue glow shows through. Now if you go back and you go to the beginning and you play your clip through, that's how you get your blue glow to fade in, and it's pretty much that simple. Once you've worked out where you want your blue glow fading to begin, then you can take your actual clip of blue glow and you can slide it to the point just before the fading occurs. Now you can see there where it's starting to go dark, that's because the blue glow underneath isn't lined up. So just come back a few seconds. But this is what I was saying before about making the blue glow slightly longer. So once the effect comes in, you've got enough time left to build the rest of the effect, because that's where your glow comes in, which is at 1.21 seconds. So then I've got 4 seconds after that to build the rest of the clip onto, and to bring in the fade to white and then trim off anything left over. This is the other reason why we pre-rendered the clip before, because if we hadn't, then we would have had to line up 3 separate layers as opposed to just lining up the 2. Doing it this way, by pre-rendering the raw footage in the still frame into one complete clip, it makes it easier to line this bit up, and that's the reason why we did it. The next element of the leap is the lightning that goes through the body as the blue glow comes in. If you come up to layer and go new solid and then change the name to lightning effect, make sure that this colour here is black, and then OK it. Right, now you can see straight away that you've got a black screen, and that's because this effect is now above everything else. But if you change that to screen, then it disappears. But it disappears from your composition, but it is actually still there as a layer. And then anything that you put into that layer will be overlaid onto the existing composition, and that's how you get your lightning to show up. So again, like we did before, stretch this out, make it the same position and the same length as your blue glow. And then if you come up to Effect and Generate Advanced Lightning, and it brings up all of this here, the Advanced Lightning control panel. Basically, what we need to do is change the lightning type to Strike rather than Direction. Then these two values here, Origin and Direction, they control these two little crosshairs here, which decide where the lightning starts and finishes. So if you bring these down to wherever you want your lightning to come in, and you click the 2 stopwatch settings, bring your timeline to the point where the beginning of the blue glow comes in, and then what you can do is you move these 2 sets of crosshairs to the point where you want your lightning to show up, and then you go forward a couple of frames and you just move this down a little bit, go forward a few more frames, move it down a little bit more, couple more frames, and so on and so forth. So once you've done that, if you play your clip through, what you should have is your blue glow, then your lightning. Now, you can control the speed of the lightning by how far you move it every couple of frames. You don't have to do every single frame, because After Effects will figure out from the last position to the next position, it will figure out itself how to move that lightning to get from where it was to where it is now. The further distance you move it between your frames will control the speed of how quickly or slowly your lightning comes through. Because I've done mine quite significant distances between the couple of frames, my lightning runs in very quickly, but then in the show it came quite quickly anyway. That's how you control the speed of your lightning, by either moving it more or fewer frames between set points. A couple of the things that you can do is, if you change this setting here to composite on original, it does exactly what it says. It composites this into the original, and it can slightly soften this to make it look more realistic. The other thing that you can do is, if you go into these core settings and glow settings, you can actually alter colour of the glow and the core, and you can make the lightning start to look a bit more like it looked in the show, because when you watch the show, the lightning wasn't always white. It did sometimes have sort of a bluish tinge to it. So by changing the setting there, and again, you can go to the glow settings and do the same thing, change the colour of the lightning, and that way you can even control the shade of the lightning to make it look more like the colours you would have seen on the show. So once you've done that, like I say, if you play your clip through, that's how you get your lightning effect. There's also a bunch of other settings that you can sort of play around with, like for example the conductivity state. You can also change the turbulence and these forking, and basically you can just sort of play around with it until you get something that you think looks good. It's down really to personal preference. It's your leap, so you can decide how you want it to look. By spending a bit of time sort of tweaking around with the settings, you can come up with something pretty decent. If you want more than one lightning bolt, then all you need to do is just add more layers. For example, if you wanted a bolt of lightning to start here, but want to start here as well and go down the length of the arm and finish at the fingertips, then you would just add in another layer, add in as many layers as you need for as many bolts of lightning as you need. And so you could just build it up, so you've got sort of 2 or 3, however many pieces of lightning you need. The next element that we want to bring in is the white glow that covers up the actor and eventually just leaves the eyes. Technically, it's not the next effect in the sequence, but it's easier to create it at this point than it is to go back and do it after we've done the next element. It's pretty simple really. If you come down to your blue glow layer and duplicate that, then rename it to white glow, then solo that layer, then bring your timeline to the point where the lightning is just about finished, because as the lightning finishes is more or less the point where we want the glow to start. Now, I did a bit of research when I was trying to figure out how to create the effect, and I did read somewhere that the studio used to animate it in frame by frame, and I haven't found anybody that can show me a better way, and I haven't figured out a better way myself. So to get the effect that we want, we're going to have to do the same and animate it in frame by frame. The way to do that is to come to your paintbrush tool and you change your foreground colour. Now in the show, sometimes the colour of the glow was exactly white, and sometimes it had a sort of electric blue tinge to it. So anywhere in that kind of range will be acceptable, whatever you think works best for your leap. So pick the colour that you want to use, then check the opacity and make sure that it's 100%, and where it says duration, set that to constant, because what that will do is the effect that we're going to paint in, that will make sure it stays on the entire length of footage rather than just for a single frame. So once you've done that, literally all you need to do is to double click on your composition and again select a suitable size soft edge brush, and you just start to bring in the effect. Very, very small amount when you first frame, then advance 1 frame forward, and what happens, because this is set to constant, anything you apply stays on the whole length of the clip. So then all you need to do is in your next frame is just slightly build up that effect a little bit more, and then you can start bringing it in other places, and then again go forward a frame, bring it out a little bit more, and by doing it this way you can achieve an effect that sort of flows in, and you can make it however you want it to be. It can either just all come in from one area, or it can come in from different areas. For example, I like to make it where it starts to bring in the arm, and then we go forward a frame, add a little bit onto there, a little bit. And what I like to do with mine is it will basically, it comes from here up the arm, comes from the shoulder down the arm, and then eventually the rest sort of catches up with it. So you just literally frame by frame build it up a small amount at a time and then go forward a frame until you've completely filled it in and you've just got the eyes left. Now the thing is, the first few frames you're going to have the most work to do because the majority of your actor it hasn't been covered by the white glow, but the further along you go the more white glow will be in, and eventually you'll have less and less to fill in on each frame. So the magic of YouTube, I'm now going to do this in fast forward so you can see what I'm talking about without having to wait for ages for me to finish it. So once you've done, if you preview the clip, you should have something like this, which is fine, except as you can see, it clearly runs too quickly. So what you need to do is right click, go to time, and what you can do now is you can do time stretch. And basically by stretching the time, we can make the clip run very slightly slower. 100% is the default, that's the normal speed. So if you change this to say 110 or 120, and then preview the clip again, and it should run slightly slower. There you go. So by changing the speed of the clip, that's how we adjust it to run however quickly we need it to run. And because it only affects this layer, it doesn't change any of the values of the other layers. If you just temporarily disable the view of the blue glow layer and you go back and you preview the clip, what we've got so far is the blue glow, the lightning, and the white glow. Now there's one other thing that we can do. If you noticed in the show that this white glow didn't completely obscure Sam's body. So to replicate that effect is actually quite simple. If you move your white glow layer above your blue glow layer and then come here to the little arrow and to transform and opacity. And what we can do is we can reduce the opacity. You don't need to set a keyframe because we're actually going to adjust the opacity for the entire length of the clip. But if you bring it down slightly, then as you can see, the more you bring it down, the more the blue glow layer underneath shows through. So by adjusting that, you can adjust it to the point where you don't have 100% opacity and you can still partially see the blue glow below. So again, if we go back and play the full clip, if you decided that you wanted to leave your opacity at 100%, that you want it to completely white out, then what you will need to do instead is, again, come to the point where the lightning is just about finished, but instead of moving up your white glow, leave it underneath the blue glow, come to transform on your blue glow, again to the opacity. This time set a keyframe and bring the opacity down to 0. Now it doesn't look like anything's happened, and the reason for that is basically we've faded out the blue glow to the white glow underneath, but because the white glow is a duplicate layer of the blue glow that we started with, you still see the blue glow, and the lightning is composited on top, so that you will see that no matter what. But as you sort of then the clip goes, that's how you get that to come in. So you have a choice. You can either make the glow opacity so you can still slightly see your actor through it, or you can have it fully white opaque, whichever works best for you. Either way that you want it, those are the ways that you get achieve the result you want. The last element that we need to add in to complete the leap out sequence is this, what I call the aura effect. Adding the effect is not actually that difficult. The hard part is finding this in the first place and then editing it to make it work. I'll try and explain as I go. Because in After Effects you could theoretically create this effect for yourself, that means you would have to know how to do it. The more I looked into it, the more complicated it seemed it would be, and to be quite honest, it was just beyond my capabilities. So in the end I decided to do what most everybody else does, which is I found this clip on YouTube which is from the very last scene of the very last episode, and the camera comes to the photograph of Al and the leap out effect happens on the photograph of Al, but then there's no leap in at the end, just the effect. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I isolate just this section of the footage, you'll see what I mean. I've had to isolate the sound because there's a song playing and I don't want a copyright strike off YouTube, but at this point we're not interested in the sound anyway, just the actual effect. But it's this section here. This is what we want. To be able to download videos from YouTube, which they do offer you the option, but you have to be a premium user, which you have to pay for that. However, there is a free piece of software called Clip Grab. If you highlight the clip address on YouTube and then paste it into here, you can actually download the clip directly to your own local machine. I'm not 100% certain what YouTube's opinion of this is, but the fact that the software is freely available on the web and it uses a specific piece of software designed to tie directly into YouTube, I don't think you can get into any trouble for using it. I've used it for a few things and I've never had any issues with it. So if you're not a premium user and you can't download it directly from YouTube, then you can download it this way. Once you've got the clip, what you need to do then is bring it into After Effects, and basically what we need to do is scroll the clip along until we get past this section, and the piece that we want to keep is once it whites out, like we did before with the original piece of footage that we recorded, our own raw footage, trim it away because we don't need anything before the white out, and then go to the end of the clip. And again, once it goes to the dark black screen, just trim it away. And that gives you the effect. Once you've trimmed the clip down and you've got it exactly as you need it, all you need to do then is to render this clip, which is the same as we've done before. Add to render queue. Give it a suitable name, which this clip is running in the direction of the leap in, so it needs to go into the leap in section. And I've already saved it once, so I've already got it, but basically just give it a name that makes sense to yourself and then just save and render. Now the reason why we've rendered this to the leap in folder when we're actually working on the leap out section of the clip is because at the moment this clip runs in the correct direction for the leap in. So what we're going to have to do now to make it work for the leap out, we're going to have to reverse the clip. So it makes sense to render this for the leap in before we go ahead and reverse the clip for the leap out. Otherwise we would have to reverse it back again when we come to the leap in part of the clip. And it cuts down on the workload because we only have to reverse it once rather than reversing it and then reversing it back again afterwards. So once you've rendered the clip to the leap in, then if you come here and right click and go time, and reverse layer. It's as simple as that. And then obviously if you go through your clip, it's now running in the correct direction for the leap out. So all you need to do then is, like you did before, render this clip, only this time send it to the leap out folder and again give it a suitable name, exactly the same as we did before. So that's how you get the clip, and this is how you edit it. Once you've got your leap out and your leap in aura effects done, come back to your leap out composition and import the aura leap out aura that you've just done. And then bring it down onto your composition, but put it in between your lightning effect and your edited raw footage. And what will happen is you'll have this. So once you've got that, there is a few things that we need to do. The first thing is we need to make it blend in with the other layers, and that is as simple as going to the mode and changing it from normal to screen. Then the other thing that you need to do is just find the point on your footage where you want the effect to come in, which I would say somewhere around about there, so that this comes in just about as the lightning is fading out. Once you've got the position of where you want it to start, then you can just drag out the footage so that it fills your entire frame. The other thing as well then is you can hold the mouse button down and you can drag it around so you can position it from where it is you want it to start. And again, just if you do reposition it, just stretch it out so it fills the screen. And that is pretty much how you get the effect. The other thing that you can do is, if the effect is not bright enough, because it will depend how bright your scene is. For example, if you're outside or you're in a brightly lit room or whatever, then this might not be enough. But what you can do is if you highlight it and duplicate the layer, and it will duplicate it exactly. So the scale and the position and everything will be duplicated. And then you can duplicate it a couple of times and that will improve the brightness until you've got it exactly as you want it. If one layer of the aura on its own is not bright enough, but two is too bright, then all you need to do is just go to one of your layers. And again, if you go here and go to transform, and you can reduce the opacity. So then you can have it one layer is at the full amount of opacity, 100%, and the other one might only be at, say, 50. That gives you the ability to control the brightness between having more than one layer of the effect and, if necessary, adjusting the opacity of one of those layers. It gives you as much control as you need, really, so you can have the effect as bright as you need it to be, or alternatively, if your scene is quite dark, for example, if it's at night or something like that, you might not need this to be as bright. So by taking the opacity down and or adding more layers, it gives you control over the brightness. So if we preview the clip now, that is more or less your leap out finished. So from there, it's just a question of fine-tuning it, really, to make sure that all the different elements of your leap come in at the right point. And if they don't, you just move them up and down the timeline until they do. And once you're happy with it, that all the elements of the effect are coming in at the right place, then you need to render the entire clip, which again is just like we've been done previously. Add to render queue. Because this is now the completed leap out, I would save it in the completed folder. Again, just give it a suitable name, save, and render. And that is basically your leap out part of the effect is completed. My leap out section is a little bit rough around the edges, but that is mainly because I've rushed it for the sake of the tutorial. So the more time and care you spend with yours, the better the finished effect will look. And obviously now we need to look at the leap in, which for the most part is the same as the leap out. There are a couple of little differences which I'm going to show you now. The way to create the leap in section is almost the same as the leap out, but because we want the effect to appear to run in reverse, it's just really down to where the effects will be positioned. So the first thing is to trim the raw footage exactly the same as you did for your leap out. The only difference is that you're going to take the still frame from the beginning of your footage, and the best place to take it from is just before you start to come out of your pose and into your reaction shot. So if you trim away that, then before you move your playhead, get your still frame from that, stretch your still frame out to your 4 seconds, then move the beginning of what's left of your edited raw footage to match it, so it seamlessly moves from the still frame to the movement in your scene. Once you've got that leveled up, you can then go and cut away anything that is not necessary for the end of the clip. So once you've done that, just preview the clip. You should have 4 seconds of still frame and then seamless transition into the movement of your scene. And the same as you did before on the leap out, then once you've got that, go ahead and pre-render it. Next thing we need to do is the same as we did with the leap out, is put in the blue glow. You create the blue glow in exactly the same way as you did for the leap out, and again it's just a question of where you position the glow and where we fade it in and out that determines it's a leap in. Once you've got your blue glow layer, import the edited footage that you've just done that has a still frame at the front of it, and what you need to do then is to bring your playhead to the point where the freeze frame stops and you have the first frame of movement. Once you get close to it, you can use the previous and next frame buttons on the preview to find the exact point. You need the last part of the freeze frame before the scene starts moving again. Once you've found that, then if you come to the transform tab on your raw footage and come down to opacity, set a keyframe there for 100%, then go back a few frames and slide the opacity down to 0, and then that does the reverse of what we did with the leap out, where we started with the raw footage and then we faded that out to the blue glow. We're starting with the blue glow and fading that out to the raw footage. So if you go back to the beginning of your clip and then preview it, you should have 4 seconds of your blue glow, which then fades out, and just as that fades out, the scene starts to move again. And I think that that is what helps to sell the illusion, because that's really all we're doing with any video effect, any special effect, is fooling the eye into thinking it's seeing what we want it to see, which it's not really, but that's the trick. And by timing the fade out to the exact right point, I think it just works perfectly. The next element to add in is the white glow, and you create that in exactly the same way as you created the white glow for the leap out, but once you've done that, all you do is come down to the layer, right click on it, go to time, and reverse the layer. Once you've reversed the clip, bring it up so it's in between the edited raw footage and the blue glow. And the reason for that is that we're going to slide this backwards along the timeline. So to the point where the glow starts to recede. We don't want the glow to be too long and we don't want it to be too short. But the reason why we need it to be above the blue glow is when the white glow has finished and the clip runs out, it's going to default to the next layer down, which is the blue glow, and that will keep the continuity of the clip. There'll be no gaps or blank frames in between. It's all about making a smooth transition. And if we preview the clip from the beginning, we've now got that and that. So obviously we can see from there that this white glow needs to come a bit further in. I mean, at the moment we're just positioning these where we roughly think that they need to be. Once we've got all of the elements in place, we can position them properly. For now, just so you get a rough idea where you think everything is, based on the fact that once that white glow has gone and the aura effect that we're going to put in and the lightning effect, you've got to think roughly how much time you need for those and sort of roughly just guess it from there for the time being. The next logical element to add in is the aura effect, which if you go to your in folder, you should already have this, because if you remember, when we got the aura clip, we downloaded it from the YouTube clip and then trimmed it down. Before we reversed the clip to use it for the leap out, we did render it as it was to use for the leap in, so you should already have this. If you haven't got it, then go back and just look at the section on the leap out where we covered this aura effect to see how to actually get this clip. And then once you've got it, just import it into After Effects, bring it down onto the timeline on the top layer, and then the same as before, change the blending mode to screen, come forward a few frames so you can actually see, and then use the mouse to drag it out so it fits your screen size. Once you've got the aura effect in place, you can then use that as a reference point to time up your white glow. You want your white glow to start fading out round about the time when you can first start to see it through the white fade and you start to see the scene underneath. That's roughly when you need to start your white glow receding. And then once you've done that, you should have just enough time to put in your lightning effect before the blue glow fades out. There's only one more element to add in now, which is the lightning effect, and that is done in exactly the same way as it was done for the leap out. Make sure that you're at the top of your layers. Go to the layer tab at the top of the screen, new, solid, make sure that background colour is black, because if it's not, if it was say blue or green, then when we come to use the mode button to merge the lightning effect onto the screen, you would see the red tinge or green or blue tinge. So by making sure that's black, then that makes sure that all you will see is the lightning effect and not any of the colour of the layer. Rename the layer to lightning effect and OK it. You just have to make sure before you create the layer that you are at the top of your list of layers, because for example, if you were say here edited footage, when you created your layer it would stick it in between those two, and we want it on the top layer. And then come to the mode button, change it to screen, then go to effect, generate, advanced lightning, and then in exactly the same as we did before, strike, composite onto original, and then just position these two crosshairs. What you want to do is, the very first frame before you want your lightning to come in, is to position these crosshairs over the top of each other. That way you'll not see anything on screen until you need it to see it on screen. Once you've done that, you can click on origin and direction stopwatch, so these will be set in your keyframes, and then exactly as we've done before, move these a small amount at a time, then go forward a few frames. Go forward a few frames, move it again, and you just repeat this process until the lightning has gone all the way to wherever you want it to fade out. I know we've already covered this in the leap out, but I'm just doing this as a recap. So once you've animated all your lightning and you've edited the colours and the turbulence, the forking and the conductivity state if you need to, then if you go ahead and preview the clip, that is your leap in completed. And if you animate it just right, the lightning fades out just as the blue glow fades out, which again kind of fits what you saw in the shot. Now that that's completed, and once you're happy with it, you just have to render the full clip. And again, because this is now a completed sequence, I would save it in the completed folder. So just obviously complete leap in sequence. So now you've completed your leap out sequence and you've completed your leap in sequence. The only thing left to do now is join the two together and add the sound effect. To get the sound clip that we're going to use, if you Google Quantum Leap sound effect, you'll find this, Technical Sounds Quantum Leap Alf's Place. And if you click on that link, it brings you to this page and there's all these different sound effects. And there's a couple of sound effects for the leap out. And then obviously just pick the best one and you can download it. Actually putting the clip together and adding the sound effect is relatively straightforward. All you need to do is import your completed leap in sequence, your completed leap out sequence, and your sound effect. Now I've discovered that the best format for the sound effect is the Windows Audio Visual W.AV. If you import it as an MP3, you may have problems with it the same as I did. And the same as a lot of people I seem to have with MP3. After Effects doesn't seem to like that format, and if you import it as an MP3, the chances are it might not work. So either download it as a WAV when you download it, or use one of the free online converters to convert it from an MP3 to a Windows Audio Visual file. The other thing that you'll need to do is when you first import these clips, what will happen is it will automatically set your work area to the length of your longest clip. Because we need the room to move these clips up and down, what you'll need to do is set the composition by going to composition settings, and we need to change the duration of the work area, which I've already changed once, but just to show you what I'm talking about, what you'll need to do is work out what is the total length of your leap out and leap in footage when it's all added together, and then set your duration for that amount. And the reason for that is the way we make this work is you slide your completed leap in footage to the end of your completed leap out footage. Now, if the work area wasn't large enough for you to do this, you wouldn't be able to move it, and that's the reason why we changed it through the composition settings. Once you've moved your leap in to the end of your leap out sequence, then all you need to do is find on your leap out where the effect begins, which I would say is about there, and then just make sure the beginning of your sound effect lines up with the start of your actual effect. And then if you go through and preview the clip, what should happen is this. As you saw there and heard, my sound effect runs out before the leap effect is finished, which means that this clip is too long. But that's easy to fix because all we need to do is come here and slide the leap in slightly backwards, and then that will shorten the length of the overall clip. Because we've got this white out at the end of the leap out and the white at the beginning of the leap in and then fades into the scene, that extra second or so gives us room to jiggle this around until the full leap matches the length of the sound clip. And we can't alter the length of the sound clip, but we can alter the length of the leap effect, and that's how you do it. So it's just trial and error really. Keep trimming it off by a small amount each time until the sound effect lasts the full length of the actual leap effect. So it's almost there. So again, we can take this in a little bit. The other thing that we can also do is, if that still isn't enough to fix it, you can always trim off a little bit of the whiteout effect on the leap out. Again, trial and error and making small adjustments at a time, you will eventually get it to fit. And then once it fits and it lasts for the full length of your clip, all you need to do then is render the entire clip. And once you've rendered it, then you should end up with a complete clip such as this. So that's roughly the steps that you go through to create the effect. Now, obviously I've rushed through the whole thing because for the sake of the tutorial, I don't want this to end up being like 4 hours long. But now you've got the basic steps, it's really down to how much care and time you put into creating your version of the effect. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed the tutorial and that you've stuck with it. I've got to admit it's been a bit of a labour of love for me, but I was determined I was going to do this because as far as I can see, nobody else has really done a tutorial that anybody could follow. So I hope you've enjoyed my efforts and that this, at least, if nothing else, gives you a starting point for how to go and create your own version of the effect.